Sophie approached her assigned seat, indicated by the stewardess, and sat down. It was the aisle seat in a row of 2 along the left side of the plane. The cabin seemed relatively empty to Sophie. An elderly woman occupied the seat in front of her, while no one sat behind. Shortly afterward, a man came up to her right, placing a small bag in the overhead compartment. He turned to her and smiled. "Hello." Realizing you would be sitting next to her, Sophie began to stand to let him pass. "No need for that. If you'd like, you can take the window seat, and I'll take this one," he said with a smile. "By the way, my name's Ethan." "Sophie," she replied as she moved into the window seat. "A very fitting name, if I may be so bold," he said, smiling at her. "Thank you," she blushed. His piercing blue eyes seemed to look straight into her soul, a gaze that felt different from the look she typically received from men. His attention remained focused on her face rather than wandering to her more obvious assets, which made her drop her gaze to survey his lean body, sending her insides into a flutter. "What's happening to me? Why am I feeling this way about a man?" she wondered. "Is this a result of you and those extra modifications?" "Sorry, this is just a normal reaction to the male of your species. Doesn't he look handsome with that tousled black hair and those striking eyes? But I'm a man. Well, I guess not anymore." "Is this how a woman feels when she's attracted to a man?" "Yes," Lyra smiled. "Oh boy, am I in trouble." Sophie's internal dialogue with Lyra took only seconds. Glancing back at Ethan under the pretense of surveying the other passengers, she tried to take in more of his physical attributes without being obvious. At least, that was her intention. Ethan was well-dressed and appeared to be a corporate executive, but when she noticed his hands, they seemed calloused, as if accustomed to physical work rather than just paper pushing. As she pondered what he might do for a living, she realized she was considering him as potential husband material. "Oh my God! How can this be? I was a man just a few days ago. Surely, it would take longer than that to change my attitudes and sexual preferences like this? Oh dear. I think that's my fault, Sophie," Lyra's thought responded. "This body is extremely feminine. It's part of how our race operates. That's why it's reacting to the physical presence of this man, along with the feelings you're experiencing, but the other part is a spillover from my thoughts. I was thinking he could be a suitable partner, and that has influenced your thoughts on the matter." "Phew. I'm glad to know that. I was starting to worry. Will this spillover continue, or can you stop it?" "I could stop it, but it's not advisable. It's part of the merging effect that our minds need to work together effectively with the orb. Maybe after all this is over, we can separate our minds, and I can enter introphany." "Introphany? I don't like the sound of that. What is it?" "Dear one, it's like an endless sleep." "You mean death, don't you?" Sophie cried, fearing the answer. "Yes, but it would be for the best. You wouldn't want me sitting in your mind, sharing your intimate moments." "No, I won't let you sacrifice yourself. I need you," Sophie pleaded. "Let's focus on surviving this crisis first, then we'll see." As Sophie gazed out the window, a tear rolled down her cheek. She didn't want to be alone in this body, and she valued Lyra's guidance. "Is something wrong?" Ethan asked, noticing her wiping away a tear. "No, I'm fine. It's just that I'm heading into Egypt alone, and I might never return if things don't turn out well," Sophie sniffed. "What a coincidence, so am I. I have some research to do involving the pyramids," Ethan replied, raising his eyebrows. "Research?" Sophie questioned, thinking he might be worth pursuing further. "You'd laugh, it has something to do with UFOs," he said, looking for any sign of disbelief. "Interesting, tell me more." Ethan looked at her in surprise, impressed by how matter-of-factly she accepted his statement. "Well, it seems a certain archaeologist deciphered a previously unknown text that speaks of a visit by an alien craft during the time the pyramids were built. I've been sent to investigate the information and see if there's any truth to it. Oh. You're looking into UFOs then? Among other things. I work for a government agency. He trailed off suddenly, glancing around the aircraft to check if anyone was listening. Seeing no one particularly close and the woman in front asleep, he relaxed, wondering why he had shared that information. He knew the agency wanted to keep the report under wraps until they could dismiss it as a hoax. Oh, I get it, one of those I could tell you, but then I'd have to kill you situations, she laughed, noticing his hesitance. Well, I suppose that's close, he continued softly. But for some reason, my instincts tell me there's something more to you than just your beauty. It's as if part of my soul is suggesting that our fates are intertwined with each other's missions, he said enigmatically. Lyra, he knows something, I'm sure of it, Sophie worried silently. I sense a power in him that's similar to yours, but of the opposite polarity. We may need him. I suggest we confide a bit more to ensure he joins us. Sophie smiled at Ethan and revealed that her mission was to save the world from an unknown threat coming from space. Expecting him to scoff and dismiss her story as the ramblings of a troubled woman, she was pleasantly surprised when his eyes narrowed and he asked where this threat was originating. After receiving the information from Lyra, she said, it's coming from the direction of, and rattled off the spatial coordinates Lyra had given her, mentioning that the threat was about 1,500 kilometers across. How did you? Never mind, he paused, scrutinizing her, then seemed to reach a decision. Nobody knows this, but 2 days ago, a cloud of something unknown was detected by radio telescopes heading this way from that exact location. We don't know what it is, but it's moving quickly. The text that was deciphered mentioned the UFO, along with a warning about a global threat unlike any other coming from space. You wouldn't happen to know what that is, would you? Should I tell him? Yes. It's a cloud of pleolites. Ha! Sophie sighed. I know this sounds bizarre, but they are a pestilence that will destroy all life on this planet if they enter our biosphere. The only thing standing in their way is me and an object called the orb, which I'm trying to find. Looking at Ethan to gauge his reaction, she was surprised to see him pale. The orb, he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. It was mentioned in the text, he continued, his gaze locked on Sophie as if searching her face for something. There was one other thing in the text. He paused dramatically, studying her expression. Oh no, she thought, here it comes. Yes, he continued, interpreting her silence as a cue to proceed. It said, protect she who holds the sun in her palms, for she is the bearer of the light that will keep the world from darkness. That was a message from my father, Lyra informed her. Sounds very dramatic. Can we really do this? Sophie thought back. God willing, we will. Are you she? Ethan asked quietly. Sophie nodded and averted her gaze from his piercing blue eyes. I am she replied simply. Look at me, please, Ethan pleaded, gently taking her hand from her lap. She turned to him, and he noticed the tears welling in her eyes. His heart melted at the realization that this woman had captured his affections, making his next task even more difficult. I have to inform my superiors about this. This is bigger than the two of us can handle. We need support to give us a fighting chance. He took out his cell phone and began making the call. Sophie froze in panic. Only Lyra's calming thoughts kept her from bolting, futile as that would be, given they were 20,000 feet in the air over the Atlantic Ocean. Calm down, Lyra reassured her, he's right, we do need more resources, and given the way he's been looking at you, I'd say he's smitten. I'm finding myself attracted to him too, but I'm confused. My mind tells me this is wrong, but my body is saying otherwise, Sophie confessed. Honey, don't worry about it. Right now, we have bigger fish to fry, to quote one of your sayings. It's all arranged, Ethan's voice interrupted her internal dialogue. What's all arranged? Sophie asked, her worry evident. We'll be met at the airport by a team flown in from Hawaii. Now, let me ask, Do you know where the orb is? He inquired anxiously. Well, I can't point it out on a map, but I can tell you the direction. It's sending me a signal that only I can sense, Sophie reassured him. Then it looks like we need to keep you alive and well at all costs, he sighed. You believe me, don't you? Sophie whispered, looking directly at Ethan. Of course. There's something unusual about you that makes me believe you're the most important person on Earth right now. I trust my instincts, they've never led me astray. As soon as they navigated the tedious customs process at Cairo Airport, they were whisked away in a dark limousine to a warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Uncertain about what awaited her, Sophie anxiously anticipated her interrogators, finding comfort only in Ethan's hand clasped in hers. A door opened from a small office within the building, and a short, gray-haired man approached them. He was older than Ethan, his face lined with the marks of time. He paused, first looking at Ethan, then at Sophie, his gaze trying to pierce her calm facade. Ethan, is this her? Yes, sir. This is Sophie, the one mentioned in the texts. How can you be sure? She looks as if a strong wind would blow her away. Definitely not my idea of the savior of the world, he scoffed. I can take care of myself, Sophie retorted, surprising herself. Why did you make me say that? She communicated to Lyra. We need to convince them now, not a week from now. Let me take charge for a few minutes while I demonstrate. Okay, but don't do anything reckless, I don't think he likes us. Please, if you want to see if I can handle myself, then get someone to fight me, Lyra said imperiously. The man smiled and whistled. At the sound, another man emerged silently from the shadows. He stood about 6'3", built like a bulldozer, with muscles rippling along his neck. He made Sophie look like a porcelain doll in comparison. As he crouched in front of Sophie, adopting a martial arts stance, Ethan's shock led him to step between them, trying to halt what was clearly an unequal matchup. Lyra tugged on Ethan's arm and whispered in his ear. I can take him on, just don't interfere. Ethan regarded her with a mixture of skepticism and concern but eventually stepped back, conceding to her wishes. Just then, the man facing her lunged with what was clearly a lethal strike. Chaos erupted as Sophie seemed to move with blinding speed, effortlessly evading the hulking man's attack. Ha! Sophie sighed. I know this is going to sound strange, but they are a plague that will annihilate all life on this planet if they enter our biosphere. The only thing standing in their way is me and an object called the orb, which I'm trying to locate. She glanced at Ethan to gauge his reaction and was surprised to see him pale. The orb, he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. It was mentioned in the text, he continued, studying Sophie intently, as if searching her face for something. There was one other thing in the text. He paused dramatically, observing her expression. Oh no, she thought, here it comes. Yes, he continued, interpreting her silence as an invitation to elaborate. It said, protect she who holds the sun in her palms, for she is the bearer of the light that will keep the world from darkness. That was a message from my father, Lyra informed her. That sounds very dramatic. Can we actually do this? Sophie thought back. God willing, we will. Are you she? Ethan asked quietly. She nodded and looked away from his piercing blue eyes. I am she replied simply. Look at me, please, Ethan urged, gently taking her hand from her lap. She turned to him, and he noticed the tears welling in her eyes. His heart melted at the realization that this woman had captured his affections, making his next task all the more challenging. I need to inform my superiors about this. This is bigger than what we can handle alone. We need support to give us a fighting chance. He pulled out his cell phone and began to make the call. Sophie froze in panic. Only the calmness of Lyra's thoughts kept her from bolting, futile as that would be, considering they were 20,000 feet in the air over the Atlantic Ocean. Calm down, Lyra reassured her, he's right, we do need more resources, and given the way he's been looking at you, I'd say he's smitten. I'm finding myself attracted to him too, but I'm feeling confused. My mind tells me this is wrong, but my body is responding otherwise, Sophie admitted. Honey, don't fret about it. Right now, we have bigger issues to deal with, to quote one of your sayings. It's all arranged, Ethan's voice interrupted her thoughts. What's all arranged? Sophie asked, worry creeping into her voice. We'll be met at the airport by a team flown in from Hawaii. Now, do you know where the orb is? He asked anxiously. Well, I can't pinpoint it on a map, but I can tell you the direction. It's sending me a signal that only I can sense, Sophie reassured him. Then it looks like we need to keep you alive and well at all costs, he sighed. You believe me, don't you? Sophie whispered, looking directly at Ethan. Of course. There's something unusual about you that makes me think you're the most important person on Earth right now. I trust my instincts, they've never let me down. Once they navigated the tedious customs process at Cairo Airport, they were whisked away in a dark limousine to a warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Uncertain about what awaited her, Sophie anxiously anticipated the upcoming interrogation, finding comfort only in Ethan's hand clasped in hers. A door opened from a small office within the building, and a short, gray-haired man approached them. He was older than Ethan, his face lined with the passage of time. He paused, first looking at Ethan, then at Sophie, trying to pierce her calm exterior. Ethan, is this her? Yes, sir. This is Sophie, the one mentioned in the texts. How can you be sure? She looks like a strong wind could blow her away. Definitely not my idea of the savior of the world, he scoffed. I can take care of myself, Sophie retorted, surprising even herself. Why did you make me say that? She communicated to Lyra. We need to convince them now, not later. Let me take control for a few minutes to demonstrate. Okay, but don't do anything reckless, I don't think he likes us. Please, if you want to see if I can handle myself, get someone to fight me, Lyra said imperiously. The man smiled and whistled. At the sound, another man emerged silently from the shadows. He stood about 6'3", built like a bulldozer, his neck corded with muscle, making Sophie appear like a porcelain doll in comparison. As he crouched in front of Sophie, adopting a martial arts stance, Ethan's shock led him to step between them, intending to stop what was clearly an unequal matchup. Lyra tugged on Ethan's arm and whispered in his ear. I can take him on, just don't interfere. Ethan regarded her with skepticism but ultimately stepped back, conceding to her wishes. Just then, the man lunged with what was clearly a lethal strike. Chaos erupted as Sophie seemed to move with blinding speed, effortlessly dodging the hulking man's attack. Should I tell him? Well, it looks like we need to, hon. Noah? If I told you the truth, you wouldn't believe me, but you hit the nail on the head. I didn't exist a week ago, Sophie said resignedly. So who, or rather, what, are you? Noah replied, leaning forward to hear her better over the engine noise. Sophie glanced at Ethan and bit her lip in anxiety as she noticed the stony expression on his face. Well, the truth is, I was given this form by an artifact that was recently discovered. It also granted me the powers I demonstrated to you last night. Ah, the mummy case. I knew we shouldn't have let them take that. Did you remove it from the museum? I heard it vanished under strange circumstances. Yes, it's safe, Sophie conceded, dreading the next question. So who are you then, and how and why did you change? Are you still human? Noah's questions felt like piercing wounds as she considered her options. Start with the easy ones, hon, and reveal your hand as you see fit, Lyra urged. I'm still human, just modified by an alien artifact that was sent here to save us from another world. I was changed into this form so that the being inhabiting my mind can harness her power to ultimately save this world. I was formerly a man, she rushed out. Sophie glanced at Ethan and saw his shock at her words. He slowed the rover to a stop and turned to her, disbelief written on his face. You're a man? I mean, you used to be a man, he gasped, trying to visualize her as a male. I can't believe it. You're so feminine. No man could talk, walk, and behave like a woman in such a short time. He believes me. Sophie thought, nodding toward Noah. Remember, I have a ghost in my head who's showing me how to be a woman. Sophie turned to look out the window, not trusting her voice, as the fear of losing Ethan's respect began to overwhelm her. Not wanting to see his disgust at discovering she was formerly male, Sophie opened the door of the Land Rover and jumped out. She ran toward the jumble of rocky outcrops bordering the roadside, wanting to disappear into oblivion. Her newly awakened feelings for Ethan were the reason for her fleeing before she broke down in tears. Even Lyra remained silent, allowing her to process her emotions as Sophie's mind spun in a whirlwind of conflicting feelings. As she ran, Ethan's shout of "Sophie, stop!" only urged her to run faster into the hot, rugged terrain. Finally, she stopped, uncertain of her surroundings, and sank to the ground in the scant shadow of a large boulder. Her muffled sobs were the only sound as she released her pent-up emotions. Lyra, he must be disgusted that I'm not truly a woman, she cried. I wish I were back in my old body with just my old problems. I feel so confused. I have feelings for a man, and the thought of him seeing me as unworthy of his affection makes my heart ache. What's happening to me? I was a man not long ago. I shouldn't feel this way. Oh, why can't I sort out my feelings? Sophie, please calm down, dear. Do you know how proud I am of you? You get your gender changed and embark on a mission that places the safety of the entire world on your shoulders. You're dealing with emotions and hormones that are new to you while carrying the essence of another person from another world. Yet you've handled all of this with hardly a complaint. I'm truly amazed by your ability to endure these pressures and challenges with just this emotional storm. Sophie felt the ghostly equivalent of a hug, but she was too upset for it to register at that moment. Hearing someone scrambling over the rocks from behind, she turned, her face streaked with tears, to see Ethan standing there, concern etched on his features. She turned away, hiding her shame as she sobbed, her tears soaking the boulder she was clutching. Sophie, please come back. I need you. Go away, leave me to my shame, she said, making a pushing away motion with her hand. Sophie, listen to me. I said go away. Sophie screamed, cutting him off. All right, I'm leaving, Ethan said sadly, reluctantly moving back toward the road. Sophie's sobs renewed, feeling an odd sense of abandonment. 5 minutes later, as her sobs subsided into sniffles, she felt a jolt as a hand touched her shoulder. Looking up, she saw Noah standing there with a strangely satisfied expression. What? Come to gloat? She asked, resigned. Now I'm sure you're human, he replied with a smile. I was beginning to wonder. Ethan is a good man, and I wouldn't want to see him involved with someone who's not truly human. Sophie scoffed. Yeah, right, like he wants anything to do with me now that he knows I'm just a faux female, she sighed. You might be surprised. He was shocked at first by your revelations, as was I, but I believe it will matter little in the long run. I saw how he leapt to your defense when he thought you were hurt. The man is smitten, trust me. Now, let's dry those tears and get back to finding the orb. He took her hand and helped her to her feet, then led the way back to the vehicle where Ethan was waiting. As she approached, her eyes downcast, she didn't notice the look in his eyes, one of a man captivated by her beauty, even with her tear-streaked face. Sophie stopped and looked up, searching for any sign in his expression that what she had revealed hadn't destroyed their growing relationship. She was unprepared for the look in his eyes, a mix of respect and something deeper. Hoping against hope that she wasn't mistaken, he handed her a damp handkerchief to wipe away her tears. Her heart raced in her chest, and she felt a bit dizzy as he pulled her into a hug. She buried her face in his shoulder, releasing the tension and finding comfort in his strong embrace, feeling secure and wanted. A cough from Noah interrupted them, bringing both of them back to the harsh reality of the world they needed to save. Ethan handed Sophie a bottle of chilled water, which she gratefully accepted as the day grew hotter. He then helped her into the Land Rover, and soon they were on their way to their objective. Having pinpointed another location for the orb using Sophie's finger for triangulation, Ethan and Noah leaned over the map, determining an approximate point to search. Meanwhile, Sophie studied Ethan in a new light, considering him as a potential partner while engaging in an intense mental conversation with Lyra. "I think I'm falling in love with Ethan," Sophie thought. "Well, I'm glad to hear that. You don't want to live a life devoid of the joys of love," Lyra replied. "But I'm a man inside this body, I shouldn't be having these feelings." "Is it wrong?" "Honey, I told you this body is ultra-feminine. You can't be a male ever again, and that's final. It has needs, as you've already discovered. Unless you want to resist this body and risk not being able to utilize the orb to its fullest, just relax and let your mind be influenced. It'll be better in the long run." "I suppose so. I think I would have liked Ethan even if I were still Bob, so having feelings for him as a woman is just another step forward." "I bet he'll be a great lover," Lyra giggled. Sophie's thoughts about Ethan making love to her sent a flutter through her heart. She felt her body respond, a thrill racing through her as her secretions increased, dampening her panties. "Okay, it looks like the orb is near the pyramids," Ethan informed her, interrupting her daydream. "It's going to be difficult to move around there without drawing attention, so we thought Noah could set up camp nearby while we pose as tourists. Once we pinpoint the orb, we can decide how to retrieve it." They spent the afternoon driving to the area and setting up camp. Both Sophie and Ethan were given discreet radio communication devices to stay in touch with Noah. After learning how to use them, Sophie decided to take a walk in the evening air while the others prepared dinner. Feeling a light breeze from the parched land to the south, Sophie inhaled deeply, trying to relax before the next day's ordeal. She could sense the pull of the orb as if it knew she was nearby. Watching the setting sun cast shifting hues over the pyramids just a few miles away, she contemplated the people who had built them so long ago. Ethan approached from behind and stood silently by her side, content to enjoy the view without breaking the peaceful moment. As they gazed upward at the sky, they seemed to instinctively move closer until Sophie felt Ethan's hand encircle her waist, pulling her close. She was about to turn and ask him something important when he gasped and pointed. "Look, what is that?" Sophie turned her gaze skyward, where a few stars were beginning to twinkle. When she saw what had shocked Ethan, she couldn't suppress her own gasp. There in the heavens, near the constellation Ursa Major, was a glowing red cloud. It appeared to pulse and subtly change colors, its shape shifting as well. "Is that what we're up against?" he asked anxiously. "It's so large." After a quick consultation with Lyra, Sophie nodded, too stunned by the sight to articulate a response. "Crap, oops, sorry for the language, Sophie, but that scares me," Ethan muttered. Then, as another thought struck him, he swore again under his breath. "The world's going to know now that they've seen that. I can't imagine the reaction." Sophie envisioned the chaos and religious fervor that would erupt from those predicting the end of the world. She worried about managing the task ahead without interference if word got out about her role. Grateful for Ethan's comforting arm around her, she shuddered involuntarily. Ethan glanced down, sensing her tremor, and was struck by her apparent innocence. "Cold?" he asked. "A little," she lied. "Come on, then, dinner is ready. I was coming to tell you earlier, but I got distracted by the view." "Yes, the pyramids look stunning at sunset," she agreed. "No, that wasn't what I was looking at," he said hesitantly. Realizing what he meant, she blushed and silently mouthed the words, "Thank you," before turning back toward the campsite. As she walked back with Ethan by her side, she wished the whole situation would be resolved and that they could simply be a couple on vacation. Despite knowing she was stronger and faster than the man beside her, she still found comfort in having someone there to support her as they made their way back to camp. "It's nice to let someone else take on the dominant role and allow yourself to lean on someone else for a change," Lyra said, interrupting her thoughts. Noah had set up a lantern on a stand, illuminating a small table prepared for two. At Sophie's questioning look, he shrugged and said, "I've eaten enough while cooking. I thought you two might want a private moment together." Sophie nodded her thanks and took a seat next to Ethan as Noah placed a remarkably delicious-smelling meal in front of her. "This is great," she remarked after tasting the food. "It's potluck stew," he laughed. "Whatever you're lucky enough to have goes into the pot." Ethan quickly pointed out the cloud, which was now clearly visible in the darkness. Noah cursed, realizing he had missed spotting it due to the lantern's light blinding him to anything outside the camp. He hurried off, stating he needed to inform them before they found out he had overlooked it. Sophie continued to eat, her focus on her plate, seemingly unaware of Ethan's presence. Her mind was in turmoil, consumed by thoughts of a sexual relationship with him. Could she? Should she? Was there anything left of Bob? Did it even matter? And what about the orb? Would she be able to use it to confront the cloud? It was almost overwhelming. A tear began to trickle down her cheek. As she started to wipe it away, Ethan's face loomed nearby. He lifted her chin with his hand and gently kissed the tear away before lowering his mouth to hers. Sophie's heart raced. Her body instinctively reacted, parting her lips to allow his tongue to explore, like a cautious animal seeking entry. Seeing that she didn't pull away, Ethan deepened the kiss, bringing his hand to her head and running his fingers softly through her hair. Sophie experienced sensations unlike anything she'd felt as a man kissing a woman. It was as if her entire body was enveloped in pleasure. Not only did her breasts and crotch send strange, delightful signals to her mind, but her whole body felt like an erogenous zone. "Is this normal for females?" she queried Lyra. "Well, it's not exactly typical by human standards, but it's definitely normal for us. We have a slightly enhanced nervous system that provides us with more pleasure than the women of your world," Lyra admitted. "It's strange and different, but wonderful. I never knew it could feel like this, and we're not even being intimate yet. How much better will it be then?" Sophie thought. "Wait and see, hon," was Lyra's cryptic reply. Ethan pulled back, ending the kiss, looking a bit embarrassed that he might have moved too fast. He didn't seem to mind that Sophie had once been a man, the passion in the kiss made that clear. Feeling reassured, Sophie smiled at Ethan and asked him to hold her for a while. They sat together, listening to a muted conversation coming from the tent as Noah contacted his superiors to inform them of their upcoming plans. Sophie enjoyed having Ethan beside her, resting her head on his chest while they held hands. A grunt from the tent signaled the end of Noah's transmission, and he emerged to walk over to them. "Having fun, are we? I think you both need to get to bed, separately," he added, grinning at their expressions. "You're going to need all the rest you can get. Tomorrow's going to be a busy day," he concluded. Ethan leaned in to give Sophie a goodnight kiss as she entered the tent that had been set up for her. Later, lying on her camp bed, she pondered where her life was heading and whether Ethan would still be a part of it after the crisis, or if he would return to his job, leaving her to navigate alone. As the desert air cooled, she snuggled deeper into her sleeping bag and eventually drifted off into dreams filled with images of orbs and Ethan. She awoke to the smell and sounds of bacon sizzling. After dressing in a long skirt and a light blouse, she slipped on a pair of mid-calf leather boots with a low heel. Trying to appear touristy while remaining practical, she was dressed for some scrambling around. She brushed her hair to remove the tangles. A scratching at the tent flap revealed Ethan crouching there with a bowl of hot water. "Hope it's hot enough for you to wash." "Oh, breakfast will be ready in 10 minutes, he added, taking in her attire with appreciation. "Thank you, I won't be long," Sophie said as she ducked back inside. She washed quickly, applied moisturizers, and used the bare essentials of makeup, deciding to hold off on lipstick until after breakfast. Sighing, she gathered her skirts and exited the tent, wishing for the luxury of a bath or shower. She made her way to the table where a rugged-looking Ethan was serving the food. "Howdy, partner," Sophie giggled. What's with the getup? Doing a Clint Eastwood impression? She teased, eyeing his cowboy boots and jeans. I like the Stetson. I wish I had one, she sighed. It's my take on being a tourist, and the boots are similar to yours, perfect for scrambling over whatever we encounter. Here, dig in, I need to grab something, he said, a gleam in his eye. As Sophie began to eat, she wondered what Ethan was up to as he disappeared into his tent. She ate quickly, washing down her meal with a mug of coffee. Just as she finished, Ethan backed out of his tent, hiding something with his body. Curious, she watched as he concealed an object beneath his shirt before turning toward her. Hey! No peeking! Close your eyes, he protested. Complying and smiling at the prospect of a surprise, she heard him approach, and then she felt a weight descend upon her head. Opening her eyes, she looked up to see the brim of a hat, definitely a Stetson. Taking it off, she discovered it was white with a simple black band. She thanked him and placed it back on her head. Ethan adjusted the brim slightly, grinning broadly at her. What's going on? She asked, wondering if something was amiss with her appearance. Who's a cowgirl now? He laughed. We make quite the pair. Sophie smiled and stood as Noah approached, handing them their miniaturized radio communicators and instructing them to keep them on at all times. He then had the two escort men break camp, and soon they were back on the road. The plan was for Sophie and Ethan to join one of the many tours of the pyramids to pinpoint the location of the orb and then return later when the crowds had dispersed. The first part went smoothly. As they approached the pyramids, they noticed local tours that included the Sphinx. Buses filled with tourists arrived, and people began milling around, boarding various tour coaches. Sophie and Ethan blended in effortlessly and soon found themselves on a bus heading for the nearby Sphinx. There was an undercurrent of tension among the guides, they muttered to one another, glancing nervously at the sky. They know about the scourge, Lyra informed Sophie. Somehow, they are aware of what the cloud is. I wonder if the secret isn't quite as secret as we thought. What about the orb? Do they know about that? Sophie asked, concern creeping into her voice. No, but they were mentioning something about an angel. As they neared the site of the massive stone structure, Sophie felt the orb's pull intensifying. She whispered to Ethan that the orb was nearby. He nodded as they disembarked, hanging back at the rear of the group as the guides began their explanations. Sophie stepped to one side, sensing the orb's presence close at hand. The disc around her neck grew warm as it reacted to the orb's emissions. Is that where it is? Ethan asked, touching the solid stone surface. Aha, Sophie replied, bringing her hand closer to the stone. As she did, the ring on her finger began to glow, responding to her proximity to the orb. By observing the gem's brightness as she moved her hand over the stone, she could pinpoint the orb's exact location, trapped within the rock. Look deeper, Han, seek the orb. Close your eyes and concentrate, then reach out and pull it free. From solid stone? You must be joking. Trust me. Close your eyes and think of the orb, only the orb. With a sigh, Sophie complied. As she closed her eyes, she felt the orb calling to her. Focusing on it, she envisioned it nestled within the rock, about a foot below the surface. It was as if the stone had turned transparent as she reached forward, her eyes still closed, concentrating solely on the orb. Ethan watched in disbelief as Sophie extended her arm, and when her fingers made contact with the rock, they seemed to penetrate it as if it were nothing. One of the guides, who had come to round up the two stragglers, gasped and rushed towards Sophie as her arm slowly disappeared into the stone. Ethan grabbed the guide's arm, shushing him, knowing that whatever Sophie was doing required her complete focus. The guide froze, staring in astonishment at the sight of a woman with her arm almost elbow-deep in solid rock. Sophie felt her fingers brush the orb, and it was as if her mind split in two. On one hand, she was aware that her arm was deep within solid stone, she felt a slight resistance, as if pushing through jello, and was even now touching the orb. Meanwhile, another part of her mind questioned how this could be happening. Fortunately, that doubt didn't affect the part of her mind already accomplishing the impossible. The orb sent a tingle through her hand, and she sensed it starting to glow as her touch triggered it. As she grasped it, she felt its warmth while she gradually withdrew her arm from the Sphinx. By this time, Ethan and the guide had been joined by the rest of the tour group, who gathered around to see what had captured their attention. Their assorted gasps and cries at the sight of Sophie pulling her arm out of solid stone fell silent as all eyes were riveted on her slowly emerging limb. Some people eagerly took photos, while others recorded the moment on video. As her wrist became visible, they could see the stone change hue as the orb's light shone through. The light intensified as it was exposed, revealing a brilliant blue ball of scintillating energy. Sophie staggered as the weight of the orb became apparent, now unsupported by the stone, and the concentrated effort had drained some of her strength. Ethan caught her, supporting her as she opened her eyes. Looking down at the orb, she marveled at its beauty. It appeared semi-transparent, and although its light made it difficult to gaze at for long, she thought she could discern tiny pinpoints of light within it, moving in a random pattern. A shout from one of the guides broke their moment, drawing everyone's attention. The other tourists either backed away in fear or began shouting questions at her. One guide attempted to take the orb from her, babbling something about the gods. As he touched it, the orb dimmed and went black, sending a thin blue spark that stung his fingers. He recoiled, his expression shifting to one of terror mixed with respect as he bowed to Sophie before fleeing back to the coach. Ethan offered her a small velvet bag intended to conceal the orb. "No, leave it out, I have a feeling about it,"